Hey, and I'm Brian. I graduated from Center in 1988. So my story about how I got into statistics was just one things of rare chance, basically. I was good at math. Everybody told me to be an engineer when I started as a freshman. So I was a math physics major. I realized probably at the beginning of my junior year that physics wasn't for me. I was still enjoying math, but I wasn't enjoying physics. Um, I did finish getting my degree in physics, but I've forgotten all of it at this point. I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be a math teacher and coach football, basically. That was the thought. And I was talking to a young woman who was a year younger than me that was also a math major. And she told me you could get a degree in statistics. It ended up her dad was the head of the Department of Statistics at University of Kentucky. So I said, wow, I can do that, because I had taken the class, and you're right, it's not taught very well a lot of times, but there was a project that I really enjoyed that was associated with it, and I really liked that. So I thought, wow, I can get a degree in that. I had no idea what I was getting into exactly. But I decided, well, I mean, a lot of it had to do with a girl. I was dating someone who was a sophomore at Center when I was a senior. And the thought was she was going to graduate and I was going to get my master's degree, and then we were going to live happily ever after. So I went to University of Kentucky. After about a year, she broke up with me. So I decided at that point not just to get a master's, but to get a PhD. So that's kind of how I got into statistics. Now, what is statistics to a certain extent? I mean, I know there's a term data science, but I often think of statistics as the science of data. And it really has to do with how to appropriately acquire data, how to display data, right? And how to interpret it. And so that's what we do largely as statisticians, if you want to think about it. I get my PhD in '94. I went to University of Louisville and worked in the medical school as a statistical consultant for a couple of years before I went into the pharmaceutical industry at Eli Lilly in Indianapolis. I was there for 9 years before I went to Amgen, which is out in Thousand Oaks, California. I was there for 9 years, and now I'm in Boston at Novartis, and I've been there at 6 years. Basically, in the pharmaceutical industry, a statistician does a lot with helping clinical teams design clinical trials so they can get the most out of the data that we're collecting to see if these drugs that we're trying to develop actually work or not. Most don't, believe it or not. 9 out of 10 compounds that are first in human eventually get killed in drug development because they don't work. So we're trying to help the company make good decisions about whether or not to continue developing a drug. And you can't do that unless you get good data, and you can't do that unless you interpret the data well. And so we can use the tools of statistics in order to do that. So that kind of gives you kind of a short feeling for my life. I got here all just through accidents, basically. But I can tell you that, I don't know, how long ago, 94, what, 25 years, 25, 26 years. I have a job that's a blast. I don't know if that makes any sense. If you're really, really good at math, then, you know, there's hardly a day that goes by that's not really interesting. So with that said, I'll leave it there so that you can ask questions.
Yeah, if it's all right, I wanted to ask a question of you two. So you both mentioned, David, you're finishing up your PhD. And Brian, you said you went on and went ahead and did yours. Would you recommend going to graduate school for everyone aspiring to be a statistician, or do you think there's work available for someone right out of the undergrad experience right now?
I'll let David answer first.
Sure, and Brian might have you know, a more valid opinion on this, but it does seem to be the case in statistics, in my opinion, that you do having at least a master's degree is highly helpful. different industries value degrees differently. My wife is a statistician. Well, we met at grad school, and in her company, having a PhD versus master's versus bachelor's, there is a definite delineation in what kind of responsibility you have, kind of how interesting your projects might be. So if somebody wants to be a statistician, at least in my opinion, I would imagine they would at least want to get a master's degree. And this is actually still pretty good. A lot of other industries, if you want to be a biologist in pharmaceutical industry, you might even need 1 or 2 postdocs. So it kind of sounds like a lot as a undergrad, but I would at least consider a graduate degree. Yeah.
Yeah. With that said, just one thing to keep in mind. I mean, I assume this is still kind of like this. A lot of large universities need teaching assistants. So when I went to graduate school, everything was paid for me, and I was paid to teach classes while I studied. So it wasn't a horrible thing, and financially it really paid off, basically, in the long run to go ahead and get your degree, get a master's or PhD. It's kind of hard to be a statistician without a statistics degree, basically would say, in general. In the pharmaceutical industry, when we tend to hire statisticians, more than likely we hire someone with a PhD to start out with. That's not been true at every company that I've been a part of. So that's not necessarily true. But I mean, I think the key is, if you think about it, if you're a math major, let's say, you had 1 class in statistics, right? So you really don't know very much of anything. With a master's degree, to a certain extent, you've had 2 years of training in statistics, because the math and the statistics, although you have to be good at math to do statistics, what you learn in a math degree doesn't necessarily translate, basically. So you've only had basically 2 years of training at that point. So that's why I think that one of the things that you'll have to learn, no matter when you stop your degree, you never stop learning. So the key is to learn as much stuff as you can about the degree, about the field that you're interested in getting involved with. David, is that pretty consistent with what you're seeing right now as well?
Definitely. And I think even with a master's degree, I hardly feel like I knew anything. I mean, I feel like I just barely scraped the surface. And yeah, what separated really strong statisticians, in my opinion, has been this drive to like see things that they don't know, and then outside of their classes or whatever, really be sure they're at least comfortable at a high level with a lot of these different concepts, because like any field, there's just so much to learn. And as a statistician, I think having a broad view of like all these different techniques, even if you can't, derive every little technique from scratch, just kind of knowing what's out there, knowing how things are related is very valuable. So I agree.
I have a question. From your all's perspective, what's the biggest difference, or some of the biggest differences, between a statistician and a data scientist? I mean, you said for what a data scientist is today, is regarded as today.
No, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. I would like to think of myself as qualified for either position, but I think typically in a data science position, you're expect to be doing a little more, I don't know, you expect to know a little more of computer science, like maybe connecting with databases or pushing a model to a server or deploying some app maybe. I think that in data science, industries can be more in tech and marketing, so there's kind of that. But I honestly think that the day-to-day, what you're actually doing, I mean, you never know. I'd say it's more industry dependent than term specific. Like, I imagine if I talk to somebody with a data science label, we could be doing the exact same thing. And so I don't think there's a whole lot, although data science does have that kind of sexier appeal nowadays because it's a buzzword. But and we can talk in more detail about that if you want. But broadly, the pretty similar. Probably depends more on the industry, but Brian might have more insight on that too.
I think a lot of it has to do with the education, right? So in data science, you're more likely to learn. I'm not good at taking large databases and programming to manipulate them together so that it's something that I can use. So that's not what I do. Basically, I think there's more of an emphasis of that in the data science program. I think talking to data scientists, and what I can say is there's less of an appreciation of where the data comes from, in that where the data comes from is really important before you start analyzing it. So I think, and that's to do with the emphasis of programs about what they talk about. Statistics has always been very much focused on, you have to understand what the data is before you can start analyzing it and where it comes from and where the biases come from. So it really has to do with the programs themselves, what they teach. So they spend less time on the foundations in data science and more on the computer science component would be my perception, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We still have a few more minutes, so now's your chance to ask your questions and get some information while we've got a couple of experts here.
I do have one more question. So having done a little bit of work in statistics in the past, do you have any recommendations on how to market like a past project? So I've done research in ecology using a lot of multivariate methods. How do I market that in a way that applies to like a different industry that has no interest whatsoever in ecology or whatever other work I've done?
Well, who are you marketing to, may I ask?
I was just wondering if you had any like general advice, because right now I'm looking for jobs in case graduate school doesn't pan out.
Right. Are you talking to other analytical people for those jobs, or are you talking to people that
I think it's a mix between HR and then the departments themselves.
So HR is not going to understand very much anything of what we do exactly. So it's going to be those within those departments themselves. I would think that if they're qualified using data, they should be aware. I mean, the reality is statistics and/or data science or anything that has to do with data is independent of the field of study. Certainly, it helps to, once you get there, to understand the science, because that will impact the method to a certain extent. But the tools that you use in order to get that oftentimes are universal. There may be some tools that I don't use as much as other tools because of the science that I work in. I think that what I would market is I would only market to the individuals that understood what I was talking about to a certain extent. But I think they should, if they're completely unaware of it, then you're hosed to start out with, right? But if they are a qualified quantitative scientist, then you oughtn't be able to bring up something and start talking about the math without them saying, yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. David, would you agree?
Yeah, and on your resume or whatever you're submitting, emphasize the methodology, the software, packages, so they at least know that, and that's going to be, for somebody who's just in the analytics, they're going to be able to kind of import that into their brain, be like, oh yeah, totally. Even if they don't know the ecology, so.
Thank you.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Well, let me ask you both, what would be your best piece of advice for students who are interested in going into the field?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing, I think you both heard us said you probably, to be in statistics, have to get a degree to start out with. So I would think that would be the first thing to keep in mind. but then I think probably the thing that's most important is to be open-minded about what you're doing to a large extent. I think that the key is to be a good statistician. It is the ability to communicate with scientists to find out what their problem is so that you can find an analytical solution to what their problem is. And you can't do that unless you're both good at working with other people and at understanding things that may not have any knowledge of, right? So those are the things that you basically have to do. You have to, let's say, you have to get like kind of a working picture of their science when you're working with them. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all. David, do you have anything other that you would add?
Yeah, that is a crucial tool because I've been doing consulting in graduate school and then meeting with scientists at NIST, and yeah, you kind of have to have a mapping of what's in their head to like the statistical kind of way of thinking that you might have, and there's usually a bit of disconnect at first, but yeah, communication, patience, listening ability, hugely important, and also more technically, and this kind of depends what area you go in, but it does not hurt to have some programming knowledge. At least, I mean, CS 117, or it might be renumbered now, the intro class. I had, that, and a couple others were good just to help beef up my chops, but statistics is getting more and more based on programming, coding, and so the more you can kind of, you might have this great idea, but can you implement it? Can you implement it in a way that's easy for somebody else to use, to help maintain? So for better or worse, statistics is getting a lot more, computational, not across every industry necessarily, but I have a hard time believing that it would be bad advice to say, beef up on your programming skills on the side. And additionally, that also opens up plenty of other opportunities as well. If you don't go into pure statistics, maybe you can go into be a data analyst or other things like that. So I think, I had so many interests in center, it was hard to decide what to do. But if you have one other thing to kind of complement your mathematical knowledge, programming is very valuable on top of like the communication, that kind of thing too. So.
Yeah, I agree. Although it was a different time and it was different programs. I'm in management now, so I very seldom do statistical work. I mostly work with people. But with that said, when I was a practicing statistician, I very seldom didn't use the available software to do programming in order to help come up with an analytical solution. If that makes sense. So.
Great, thank you guys so much. Any final question before we close?
Well, David and I are both offline. Hopefully you'll have our email address, and we're both happy to take any other questions that you have as you're considering your future. I know this is a rough time. I can remember it, even though my hair is graying. But just remember, I think in general, alumni are very happy to share with you, what it is we do, why it's important, and try to help you work through this stuff. David, anything from you?
Absolutely. Good on you guys for hanging in there during the pandemic. I can't imagine doing that in undergrad. And thank you for taking your time to come. I know you got a lot on your plates probably, but we appreciate it, and great luck with your futures, your decisions, wherever you are in your journey. And yeah, totally feel free to reach out about anything that could be of use for. So.
We've gotten several thank yous in the chat, but everybody else, thank you. Join me in thanking them virtually for all this great information today. We really, really appreciate both of you. So you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And for the students, keep in mind, we've got a lot more chats both today and tomorrow. So feel free to pop into any of those of interest to you. And then videos will be posted later on YouTube. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Thank you. Thanks, Joy. See you.
My pleasure. Thank you.